Director General Fu Linghui of the National Economic Comprehensive Statistics Department of National Bureau of Statistics. He will brief you about economic indicators in the first quarter and take your questions. Friends from the media, good morning. As usual, I will first give you the key numbers of economic indicators in the first quarter and then take your questions. In the first quarter, national economy got off to a generally stable start. Faced with multiple tests of increasingly grave and complex international environment and the COVID-19 situation at home, under the strong leadership of the Central Committee of the CPC, with Comrade Xi Jinping at its core, all regions and departments implemented decisions and arrangements made by the CPC Central Committee and the State Council, coordinated the efforts of COVID-19 control and economic and social development, and made economic stability the top priority and pursued progress while ensuring stability. As a result, the national economic recovery was sustained and the operation of the economy was generally stable. According to preliminary estimates, the gross domestic product in the first quarter reached 27,017.8 billion yuan, up by 4.8% year-on-year at constant price, or up by 1.3% over that in the fourth quarter of 2021. By industry, the value added of the primary industry was 1.09 trillion yuan, up by 6% year-on-year. That of the secondary industry was 10.61 trillion yuan, up by 5.8%, and that of the tertiary industry was 15.3 trillion yuan, up by 4%. Firstly, agriculture production was stable and animal husbandry grew steadily. In Q1, the value added of agriculture grew year-on-year by 4.8%. With generally favorable weather conditions and strong agricultural production services, spring farming and preparation were carried out in a steady and orderly manner. According to the year-round planting intention survey, the planting area intended for wheat and rice was generally stable, and that for soybeans increased considerably. In the first quarter, the output of meat and poultry was 23.95 million tons, up by 8.8% year-on-year. Of this total, the output of pork, beef, and mutton was up by 14%, 3.6%, and 1.4% respectively. The output of milk was up by 8.3%, and that of eggs up by 2.5%. At the end of Q1, the number of pigs in stock was 422 million, up by 1.6% year-on-year, among which 41.85 million were breeding sows. Secondly, industrial production grew fast, and middle to high-end manufacturing industries enjoyed sound growth. The total value added of large-scale industrial enterprises grew by 6.5% year-on-year in the first quarter. By sectors, the value added of mining increased by 10.7%, manufacturing up by 6.2%, production and supply of electricity, thermal power, gas, and water up by 6.1%. The value added of high-tech manufacturing and equipment manufacturing increased by 14.2% and 8.1% respectively. That's 7.7 percentage points and 1.6 percentage points faster than that of the large-scale industrial enterprises. By types of ownership, the value added of state-holding enterprises was up by 5% year-on-year, that of joint stock enterprises up by 7.8%, and that of enterprises funded by foreign investors or investors from Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan was up by 2.1%, and that of private enterprises was up by 7.6%. In terms of products, the production of new energy vehicles, solar cells, and industrial robots were up by 140.8%, 24.3%, and 10.2% respectively. In March, the value added of large-scale industrial enterprises grew by 5% year-on-year, or 0.39% month-on-month. In March, the Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index stood at 49.5%, and the Production and Operation Expectation Index was 55.7%. In the first 2 months, the total profits made by industrial enterprises were 1.15 trillion yuan, up by 5% year-on-year. Thirdly, the service sector continued to grow and modern services registered a good momentum of growth. In Q1, the service sector continued to recover. Specifically, the value added of information transmission software and information technology services and financial intermediation grew by 10.8% and 5.1% year-on-year. The index of services production increased by 2.5% in the first quarter and decreased by 0.9% year-on-year in March. In the first 2 months, the business revenue of services enterprises grew by 13.6% year-on-year. In March, the business activity index for services stood at 46.7%, and the business activity expectation index was 53.6%. Industries involving contacts and gatherings such as railway transportation, airway, lodging, and catering were under impact by the pandemic. The business activity index for industries like telecommunication, broadcast television and satellite transmission services, monetary and financial services, and insurance services stayed within the high expansion range of 55% and above. Fourthly, market sales maintained growth and online retail sales were active. In the first quarter, the total retail sales of consumer goods reached 10.86 trillion yuan, up by 3.3% year-on-year. By different areas, the retail sales of consumer goods in urban areas reached 9.4 trillion yuan, up by 3.2%, and that in rural areas, 1.43 trillion yuan, up by 3.5%. By consumption patterns, the retail sales of goods were 9.8 trillion yuan, up by 3.6%, and the income of catering was 1.06 trillion yuan, up by 0.5%. Goods for basic living enjoyed good sales, with retail sales of grain, oil, and food, and daily necessities by large enterprises up by 9.3% and 6.6% respectively. The sales of upgraded consumer goods grew fast. The retail sales of cultural and office appliances and jewelries by large enterprises grew by 10.6% and 7.6% respectively. The online retail sales reached 3.012 trillion yuan, up by 6.6%. Specifically, the online retail sales of physical goods were 2.525 trillion yuan, up by 8.8% and accounting for 23.2% of the total retail sales of consumer goods. In March, the total retail sales of consumer goods reached 3.42 trillion yuan, down by 3.5%, and 1.93% month-on-month. Fifthly, investment in fixed assets increased and investment in high-tech industries and social sectors grew fast. In Q1, the investment in fixed assets, excluding rural households, reached 10.48 trillion yuan, up by 9.3% over that of previous year. Specifically, investment in infrastructure was up by 8.5%, manufacturing up by 15.6%, real estate development up by 0.7%, and the floor space of commercial buildings sold reached 310.46 million square meters, down by 13.8%. The total sales of commercial buildings were 2.96 trillion yuan, down by 22.7%. By industry, the investment in the primary sector went up by 6.8%, secondary industry up by 16.1%, and in the tertiary industry up by 6.4%. The private investment reached 5.96 trillion yuan, up by 8.4%. The investment in high-tech industries grew by 27%. Specifically, the investment in high-tech manufacturing and high-tech services grew by 32.7% and 14.5%, respectively. In terms of high-tech manufacturing, the investment in manufacturing of electronic and communications equipment and of medical equipment, measuring instrument and meter grew by 37.5% and 35.4%, respectively. In terms of high-tech services, the investment in information services and services for transformation of scientific and technological achievements or commercialization went up by 21.3% and 19%, respectively. The investment in social sectors went up by 16.2%. Specifically, the investment in health sector and education sector went up by 23.8% and 17.2%. In March, the investment in fixed assets went up by 0.61% month-on-month. Sixthly, imports and exports of goods witnessed rapid growth and trade structure continued to improve. In Q1, the total value of imports and exports of goods was 9.41 trillion yuan, an increase of 10.7% over that of the previous year. The total value of export was 5.22 trillion yuan, up by 13.4%. Of imports was 4.18 trillion yuan, up by 7.5%. The trade balance was 1.03 trillion yuan in surplus. The general trade increased by 13.9%, accounting for 63.2% of the total value of trade, 1.8 percentage points higher than that of the same period of the previous year. The trade by private enterprises accounted for 48% of total value of trade, 1.4 percentage points higher than last year. In March, the total value of trade was 3.206 trillion yuan, up by 5.8% year-on-year. The total value of exports was 1.75 trillion yuan, up by 12.9%. That of imports was 1.45 trillion yuan, down by 1.7%. Seventhly, consumer price experienced mild growth, and the year-on-year growth of producer prices for industrial products slowed. In Q1, the CPI grew by 1.1% over last year. Specifically, CPI in urban areas went up by 1.2%, and in rural areas went up by 0.7%. By commodity categories, prices for food, tobacco, and alcohol went down by 1.3%, clothing up by 0.5%, residence up by 1.4%, articles and services for daily use up by 0.6%, transportation communication up by 5.5%, education, culture, and recreation up by 2.6%, medical services and healthcare up by 0.6%, and other up by 0.7%. In terms of food, tobacco, and alcohol prices, the price for grain went up by 1.7%, fresh fruit up by 6.9%, fresh vegetables up by 3.7%, and pork down by 41.8%. The core CPI, excluding the price of food and energy, grew by 1.2% over that of last year. In March, the CPI went up by 1.5% year-on-year and 0.6 percentage points faster than that of February, and maintained the same level month-on-month. In Q1, the producer prices for industrial products went up by 8.7% year-on-year. Specifically, the prices in March went up by 8.3%, 0.5 percentage points slower than the growth in February, or up by 1.1% month-on-month. In Q1, the purchasing prices for industrial producers went up by 11.3%. Specifically, March prices went up by 10.7% year-on-year, 0.5 percentage points slower compared with the growth in February, or up by 1.3% month-on-month. Eighthly, newly increased employment in urban areas expanded, and surveyed unemployment rate increased. In the first quarter, the newly increased employed people in urban areas numbered 2.85 million, and the urban surveyed unemployment rate averaged 5.5%. In March, the urban surveyed unemployment rate was 5.8%, which is 0.3 percentage points higher compared with February. In the surveyed unemployment rate of population with local household registration was 5.6%, that of population with non-local registration was 6.3%. Among which the rate of population with non-local agricultural household registration was 5.9%. Specifically, the surveyed unemployment rates of the population aged from 16 to 24 and from 25 to 59 was 16% and 5.2% respectively. The urban surveyed unemployment rate in 31 major cities was 6%. The employees of enterprises worked 47.3 hours per week on average. At the end of the first quarter, the number of migrant workers who left their hometowns and worked in other places totaled 177.8 million. Ninthly, residents' income increased stably, and urban-rural per capita income ratio narrowed. In Q1, the nationwide per capita disposable income of residents was 10,345 yuan, with nominal growth of 6.3% year-on-year, or the real growth of 5.1% after deducting price factors. In terms of permanent residents, the per capita disposable income in cities was 13,832 yuan, with nominal growth of 5.4% year-on-year and real growth of 4.2%. Per capita disposable income of rural households was 5,778 yuan, with a nominal growth of 7% and real growth of 6.3%. In terms of income source, the nationwide per capita salary income, net operative income, net property income, and net income from transfers saw a growth of 6.6%, 5.4%, 6.1%, and 6.3% in nominal terms, respectively. The per capita disposable income of urban households was 2.39 times that of rural households, 0.04 less than the ratio of the same period last year. The median of the nationwide per capita disposable income of residents was 8,504 yuan, with nominal growth of 6.1% year-on-year. Generally speaking, the economy in Q1 continued the momentum of recovery, performing within the reasonable range. We must be aware that domestic and international environment becoming more complicated and uncertain. As we face these challenges, we must follow the guidance of Xi Jinping thought on socialism with China's characteristics for a new era and fully implement the spirits of the Central Economic Work Conference and the arrangements made by the report of the work of the government. We must coordinate the efforts of COVID-19 response and social development, make economic stability our top priority and pursue progress while ensuring stability, and put the task of 6 assurances and safeguards front and center. We will continue to stabilize prices, improve people's lives, and keep the economy performance within an appropriate range. Now, the floor is open for questions. Please identify your affiliation before raising your question. Thank you. CMG, China National Radio. What do you look at the economic performance in the first quarter, and what is the future trend of China's economy?
Thank you for your question. Since this year, industrial production is generally stable, as we are taking more policies to stabilize the production. In the first quarter, the added value of major industries increased by 6.5% year-on-year, better than the fourth quarter and maintaining a steady growth. The reasons can be credited to domestic and global economic recovery and be attributed to innovation-driven development, as well as the upgrade in industrial development. Also, efforts to ensure supply and rapid growth of relevant industries are also playing important roles. First, industrial upgrade. As our development phase continue to be advanced, there is a growing market demand for medium to high-end products. This is coupled with the implementation of the innovation-driven development. Equipment manufacturing is developing sound. In the first quarter, equipment manufacturing increased by 8.1% year-on-year. In particular, electric mechanics and computers, telecommunications, and other electronic products all increased by over 10%. In the first quarter, high-tech manufacturing increased by more than 14.2% faster than other major industries. Second, consumption products manufacturing continues to be expanded. There is a growing demand for consumption goods. This also contributed to the growth in manufacturing growth. In the first quarter, agricultural sideline products, processing, food processing, alcohol and fine tea processing industries, as well as pharmaceuticals, increased by 6.4%, 6%, 12.1%, and 11.8% respectively. In total, these 4 industries contributed to 1 percentage points to the growth of major industries. Third, export growth is expanding more rapidly. We have a fully fledged industrial system with strong supporting capacities. We are adaptive to global changes. In the first quarter, shipment value of industrial export increased by 14.4%, a relatively fast pace. In particular, car manufacturing and designated products manufacturing shipment value increased by over 20%. Fourth, production expanded in coal and electricity industries. We are making more efforts to ensure supply. In the first quarter, the mining industry increased by 10.7% year-on-year. Mining and washing of coal increased by 13.2%. The production and supply industries of electricity and heating and that of gas are also expanding rapidly. In total, these industries contributed to around 1.4 percentage points to the growth of major industries. Relief policies for businesses are also playing a positive role to stabilize industrial production. In the first quarter, we have surveyed around 110,000 businesses of major industries. 66 4% of those companies are satisfied with our relief policies, 2.7 percentage points higher on a quarterly basis, and their satisfaction rate for tax and fee cuts were over 85%. At the same time, due to COVID, in March, industrial growth have slowed for major industries. We need to see that we are still resilient. We are fully prepared to withstand the pressure and ensure the steady growth of industrial production. Going forward, we need to deliver on the supportive policies of major industries and extend support for manufacturing and MSMEs. We'll also support companies that are affected by COVID and ensure supply and a stable price for energy raw materials. Thank you. Thank you from China Daily. Due to complex international circumstances and domestic flare-up of cases, China's economy is facing pressure. What is your assessment? What are the characteristics of the first quarter economic operation? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Chinese economy, especially the Q1 statistics, is followed very widely by the media. This year, we can see that the international situation is getting more complex and challenging. And at home, COVID-19 is reappearing in many places, and cases are detected more frequently. This has dealt a heavy impact on the economic performance. Facing the complex challenges, regions and departments have implemented decisions of the CPC Central Committee and State Council, put stability as our top priority and pursued progress for ensuring stability. We focused on stabilizing the macroeconomic fundamentals and effectively met risks and challenges. That's why the economy continued to recover, and Q1 was off to a good start. Basically, first, the major macroeconomic indicators were kept in the appropriate range. In terms of growth, GDP in Q1 grew by 4.8%. That's 0.8 percentage points higher than Q4 last year and 1.3% higher than Q4 quarter on quarter. In terms of employment, the overall stability in China's employment has not changed despite the uptick in surveyed unemployment rate in cities in March. In Q1, urban surveyed unemployment rate on average was 5.5%, basically the same as last year. In terms of prices, CPI in Q1 rose moderately by 1.1%. In terms of international balance of payment, the surplus in trading goods expanded while the deficit in trading services narrowed. Foreign exchange reserve stabilized at around $3.2 trillion. And international balance of payment is stable. Secondly, industry and agriculture production was generally stable. Spring farming and preparation is well underway. Animal husbandry production grew steadily, and the agriculture situation has sustained. In the first quarter, agriculture, forestry, animal husbandry, and fisheries increased by 6.1%, while poultry and meat grew by 8.8%. Industrial output grew fast. Thirdly, innovation-driven growth continued. New industries continue to grow. In Q1, high-tech manufacturing grew by 14.2%, information transmission software and IT services grew by 10.8%, all very fast. New modes of businesses continue to strengthen. In Q1, physical product sales online grew by 8.8%, accounting for 23.2% of total consumer goods retail sales. Fourthly, our economic mix continued to improve. Manufacturing continued to take a bigger part. In Q1, manufacturing grew by 6.1%, accounting for 28.9% of total GDP. That's 1.3 percentage points higher than last year. The driving role of consumption is very significant. In Q1, final consumption and expenditure contributed 69.4% to economic growth, which is 18.7 percentage points higher than last year, and higher than the contribution of capital formation. The ratio of urban and rural income have come down a bit. In Q1, disposable income ratio of rural urban residents was 2.39. That's 0.04, smaller than last year. Fifthly, economic transition continued to proceed steadily. Green and low carbon products grew very fast. In Q1, production of new energy vehicles and solar cells grew by 140.8% and 24.3% respectively, and clean energies continued to rise in its share in energy consumption. In Q1, natural gas, hydropower, nuclear power, and other clean energies take a higher share in energy consumption. That's 0.8 percentage points higher. Unit consumption, consumption per unit of GDP continued to decline. In Q1, it dropped by 2.3%. Sixthly, people's life continued to improve. Residents' income continued to grow. In Q1, nationwide, the disposable income grew by 5.1%. Rural residents grew by 6.3%, and for cities, the number grew by 4.2%. The basic needs of people have been met. In Q1, the consumer goods manufacturing grew by 8.1%, and retail sales of food, oil, and grain and beverages grew by 9.3% and 11.8% respectively. Investment in social sectors increased continuously. In Q1, investment in education and health grew by 17.2% and 23.8% respectively. It is worth noting that since March, the world situation has been complex and fluid, and domestically, the COVID-19 continues to have an impact on the economy. Some of the factors have exceeded our expectation, and that's why some major indicators slowed, and there is a pressure on economic performance. But the sound fundamentals for the China's economy in the long run remains unchanged, and a momentum of economic recovery and growth remains unchanged. We still enjoy huge potential, strong resilience, and broad space. We have the capacity and conditions to overcome difficulties and challenges and achieve sustained, healthy economic growth. Going forward, we will continue to implement the decisions of the Central Work Economic Conference and the Government Work Report, coordinate the COVID-19 response in economic and social development, continue to pursue progress while ensuring stability, and place stabilizing the growth at a more prominent position. We will focus on stabilizing the economic fundamentals, meeting people's basic needs, keep the key economic indicators within appropriate range, and continue to score new achievements in high-quality economic development. Thank you. With CNBC, I have two questions. First, on employment. In Q1, newly created jobs dropped from Q1 last year. What are the reasons of this fall? And in terms of employment figure data for people above 35 years old, do you have more details? Another question regards work and production. Due to COVID-19, some worry that if work and production cannot be resumed till May, their operation will be hit. So what is your view on this impact on the economic performance in the coming period?
Thank you for the question. We know that domestic flare-ups of cases and the international landscape have indeed posed pressure on employment, but employment first policy is brought to bear. relief policies for businesses are also brought to bear. In the first quarter, surveyed unemployment was averaged 5.5%, 0.1 percentage points higher than last year. 4.9% of them are above 35 years old. There's an increase in the surveyed unemployment. The reason for that in the first 2 months is due to quarterly reasons, seasonal reasons. There are changes of employment in the Spring Festival season will result in a higher unemployment rate. Coming March, we will see a decrease. Normally, we will see a decrease in unemployment, but due to a variety of reasons, people's employment is affected due to a number of reasons. In March, surveyed unemployment rate was 5.8% in March, higher than February. It reflects a growing pressure on employment. Regardless, there are still favorable factors for us to maintain steady employment. We will strike a balance between economic development and pandemic response. We will continue to adopt tax and fee cuts to support businesses and alleviate their pressure. It will be conducive to job creation. Innovation will also be conducive to the increase in job opportunities, which will be good for the supply and demand in the job market. We will continue to advance the employment first policy, stabilize the job market, and ensure that people can find jobs. We will work hard on rural migrant workers and college graduates in particular, on how employment affects economic development and livelihood. Due to COVID, contact businesses were weighed on. In the context of COVID, tourism, catering industry are witnessing a contraction in their business operation. Companies in hard-hit areas have halted or cut back in their production. Difficulty in transportation also affected their production. Despite these pressure, economic recovery is still solidly founded. First, strong resilience. The fundamentals of our economy remains unchanged. We have a fully fledged industrial system and bettering infrastructural development. Innovation-driven development is brought to bear to advance the sound growth of the economy. Second, sound response to the pandemic. We have taken targeted and science-based measures to respond to COVID cases. We are seeing new features in the transmission of the virus. As long as we stick to our current measures, we will be able to mitigate the impact of COVID on the economy. Third, we are prioritizing stability and make progress on that basis. We have taken a variety of policies in that regard. We are cutting tax and fee to the tune of 2.5 trillion RMB yuan this year. We are also stepping up financial support for businesses. PBOC have cut RRR to lower financing costs for companies, which will be beneficial and helpful for companies, and in turn be conducive to economic growth. Going forward, we will strike a balance between economic growth and pandemic response. We will deliver on the policies made and ensure that people's basic living needs are met. Thank you. Thank you. Since this year, commodity prices across the world is relatively high. What is your assessment on how the commodity prices will affect the growth?
This year, the world situation has been very fluid, and commodity prices have registered new highs. Based on World Bank statistics, in March, international energy prices came up by 24.1%. Non-energy commodities rose by 18.1%. So these indexes were both new highs for this year. These prices are expected to be volatile at high level. Globally, Russia is an important source of energy, food, and Ukraine is a major source of maize and wheat. The conflict has reduced the supply and exacerbated export control, which will impact the global commodity market. The global recovery will show an increase in demand. Under the panic, some countries will increase their hoarding of relevant commodities. At the same time, geopolitical conflicts can lead to sanctions and counter-sanctions, which will impact the efficiency of global supply chain, increase the cost of logistics, and put a heavier pressure on price hike. Amid such growing uncertainties, volatility at a high price level is highly likely. Thank you.
My question is about industrial output. Crude steel output in the first quarter fell 10.5%. Cement fell 12.1%, and yet FAI, fixed asset investment, rose 9.3%. How do you explain the difference or the massive divergence between the collapse in industrial output for these products that are used for investment, but the continued rise in investment? Thank you.
请翻译一下。
我们看到第一季度的工业品，比如钢铁、水泥等，都有大幅的下降，但是工业投资却有上升。请问如何解释这一些数据之间的矛盾之处？谢谢。
好，谢谢您的提问。应该说呢，大家呢对数据的
Thank you for your question.
也是比较关注比较多。
This year, we have heard some concerns about the statistics. Let me say that the Chinese economy is transitioning from high-speed growth to high-quality development, and there are new changes in economic performance. In terms of industrial output, high-tech manufacturing and equipment manufacturing has been growing very fast, and their support for industry has been very strong. In terms of industrial investment, we can see that in manufacturing, high-tech manufacturing and equipment manufacturing has been growing at a high level. In the past, industrialization and urbanization has been driving growth in China, but this has changed significantly in recent years. You just mentioned steel, cement has slowed in their growth, but industrial output continued to grow. The reason is that the driving forces for the Chinese economy has changed a lot, and we are moving toward the medium and higher end of the value chain. And our investment in industry, for example, in this year, you can see that in the three major areas, manufacturing grew quite fast. And in terms of traditional products like steel and cement, are not the same as what we saw before. So we need to look at the economic performance objectively, and that's how we can lead to a correct conclusion. Thank you.
好，先这边吧，第3排那边男记者。对。
谢谢主持人。澎湃新闻记者提问：近期
The paper.
上海等省市的社会经济
Recently,
生活受到了疫情冲击。请问
work and life in Shanghai and some other cities and provinces have been affected by COVID-19. How do you look at the impact of this wave of COVID-19 and how is it going to impact the growth this year?
Since the beginning of this year, there are uncertainties across the world. COVID continues to spread globally. Geopolitical conflicts intensified. There are rising uncertainties and instabilities. Domestic flare-up of COVID cases, coupled with some factors that are different from what we expected, have added to a downward pressure on the economy. Regardless, under the strong leadership of the CPC Central Committee, different localities and departments are prioritizing stability and pursue progress on that basis and coordinate pandemic response and economic development. Economic indicators are kept within a reasonable range. Despite the pressure, there are still favorable conditions for us to maintain steady growth throughout the year. First, consumption recovery is expected to be sustained. COVID indeed weighed on consumption, but the recovery in consumption will not change, and it will continue to play a pivotal role. In the first quarter, growth in consumption contributed to 69.4% to economic development, still the biggest contributor. As COVID impact is gradually kept at bay, employment-first policy is brought to bear. They will also increase the willingness and ability of residential consumption. Efforts to advance consumption of EV and smart home appliances, integration of online and offline consumption, development of new business models and growth models, consumption upgrade in rural areas will also increase or sustain the growth in consumption. Second, investment is expected to be enhanced. In the first quarter, manufacturing increased by 15.6% in terms of investment. Investment in infrastructure increased by 8.5%. As we are upgrading traditional industries and cultivating new industries, we will be able to boost investment in the industrial sector. On the decisions of the country and the 14th Five-Year Plan, we are properly front-loading relevant investment in infrastructure, which will also be conducive. Third, industrial upgrade. We are adopting innovation-driven strategy to shore up our technological development. We are adopting extra tax deduction for R&D expenses, which is producing benefit. In the first quarter, high-tech manufacturing increased by 14.2%, equipment manufacturing by 8.1%. Industries are becoming more tech-intensive. Fourth, green transitioning is also playing an important role. As we are advancing green development, there is a growing demand for energy-efficient products, and as we are transforming the traditional sector to less carbon-intensive, we will be able to boost development of relevant industries. In the first quarter, EV and solar-powered batteries production capacity increased by 140.8% and 24.3% respectively. 5G information and AI are also developing rapidly, cultivating new growth points. In the first quarter, smart consumption manufacturing increased by over 10% year-on-year. Fifth, reform and opening up. Despite complex international circumstances, the global recovery is still sustained, which means that there is growing demand for Chinese export products. We are taking measures to stabilize foreign trade, and as we are advancing Belt and Road cooperation, there are more business forums, which means it is conducive to the growth in trade. In the first quarter, our trade grew by 10.7%, which show the resilience of our trade. Sixth, macroeconomic policies. We are acting on the decisions of the Central Economic Work Conference and the Government Work Report. We are making progress while maintaining stability, rolling out policies to stabilize economic growth and support the real economy. We are ensuring supply to stabilize price. We are front-loading arrangements. In terms of macroeconomic policies, we are actively supporting market entities to ensure food and energy security, to safeguard industrial and supply chains. With these policies, we will be able to maintain steady economic recovery. Overall, we still have large market opportunities and tremendous benefits coming out from reform and opening up. Throughout the year, economic recovery is expected to be sustained. That said, we need to place high importance on the problems we are facing right now and act on the decisions by the CPC Central Committee and the State Council, strike a balance between economic development and pandemic response, and step up macroeconomic policies to stabilize growth. Thank you.
负面新闻记者提问：今年以来，房地产销售下降。
Since this year there is a drop in real estate sales, but there is growing investment in this sector. What is your assessment, and how do you see it will develop in the future?
Thank you. The real estate market has been followed very closely, and some indicators this year in terms of real estate has been discussed widely. Historically, the two indicators you mentioned has been proceeding in the same direction, but the growth in real estate market is significantly smaller than the sales of commercial buildings. Normally, when a project is started, they will continue to invest to ensure the return of investment. And there is a steady stream of input. Even in sluggish market, the investment could maintain a certain extent of growth. In 2012, 2014, and 2015, we have seen similar situations. In first quarter this year, real estate development investment grew by 0.7%, while the number of floor space of commercial buildings sold dropped by 13.8%, and total sales revenue dropped by 22.7%. So this going in the opposite direction, it can be explained by a few reasons. First is the effect of the policies, including ensuring delivery. Since last year, the end of last year, all the regions have continued to ensure delivery, ensure people's livelihood, and ensure stability. For those that have been invested for more than 1 year, the growth of investment exceeded 10%. As the project continued to be implemented, the installment investment increased by 0.9%, which has driven the growth of real estate investment by more than 0.5 percentage points. Secondly, the purchase of land has been included in the calculation. The spending on land acquisition has been supported the numbers in investment in real estate. In Q1, land acquisition grew by 0.6%, which also has driven the growth of real estate development investment by more than 0.1 percentage point. At the same time, we must see that despite the drop in sales, the total revenue of sales is still bigger than the volume of investment, and sales can still support to some extent the investment. At the same time, the rise in prices of materials and installment has also beefed up the nominal growth of real estate investment. Despite the fall in the real estate sales at the moment, as different regions continue to adopt policies such as easing the restriction of purchases, lowering the threshold of public housing providence, and acceleration of approval of loans. The needs will be met, and the sold floor space will narrow in its decline. We will continue to make sure that the houses are to be living in, not to be speculated with, and continue to improve the real estate market and stabilize this property market.
第二排这边。
谢谢发言人向《今日导报》记者提问。我们注意到，近日中央
Hong Kong Economic Herald. The State Council has released a policy paper on building a unified domestic market. How can we understand this policy, and what are the measures to do that?
Thank you. There is an opinion on building a unified market, proposing to establish unified standards for a domestic market and break relevant bottlenecks and increase the flow of production factors across the country. It will be conducive to the building of a unified market. We have a big market, but we are now moving toward a stronger market. It will be beneficial for us to build a high-quality socialist economy and the high-quality development that we are advocating for. First, it is a foundation and important requirement for us to foster a new development paradigm. For the sound and healthy growth of the economy, we must adhere to the new development philosophy and foster a new development paradigm with domestic circulation as the mainstay and international and domestic circulation reinforcing each other. We need to establish a normative domestic market which will be beneficial for the flow of production factors. Second, it is beneficial for us to have a transparent, fair market environment. We are making efforts to set up a good market environment for business entities to boost employment and advance development. As the development of unified market advances, there will be a more fair and transparent market environment, which will create more high-quality job opportunities and inject strong impetus for the growth of the domestic economy. Third, it will be conducive to innovation development. We have 1.4 billion people and a super big market. This unified market and adhering to the decisive role of the market will be good for proper allocation of resources and division of labor. It will encourage companies to advance innovation and improve efficiency, quality, and growth drivers. It will be also a strong underpinning for domestic development. Fourth, it will be good for us to lower transaction costs. Going forward, we need to implement the opinions to establish a unified market, align different standards, build a unified market, and ensure that there is fairness and compliance oversight. All these will be beneficial for the sustained growth of the domestic economy. Thank you. from Reuters. There is downward pressure on the economy as more cities are having restrictive measures due to COVID. Will they increase risks for stagflation? And I would like to know more about the role of trade for economic development. I will take your second question first on the role of trade. Trade increase contributed to 3.3% to domestic growth. Sorry, that was consumption. And trade in goods contributed to 0.2 percentage points to the domestic growth. And on the role of investment price, we are seeing a steady recovery in economic growth, which will be sustained on prices. Commodity prices are increasing, adding to the impact on the domestic economy. We have sufficient supply of goods and a solid foundation for us to maintain stable price. CPI witnessed a mild growth. CPI growth by 1.1%, relatively bigger than last quarter. On a monthly basis, in March, CPI grew by 1.5%, 0.6 higher than last month. Core CPI was 1.1%, relatively the same than last month. Food prices in March dropped by 1.5%. Price in pork dropped by 1.4%. Second, industrial products increased by 3.5%. Services price dropped by 1.1%, increased by 1.1%, 0.1 percentage points less. Due to COVID and weather, vegetable prices increased by 1.2%. In total, the two have contributed to 1.42 percentage points, accounting for around 90%. Fresh food is facing supply pressure, but there are still considerable favorable conditions for the prices. From the supply side, food is harvested. There is sufficient reserves. Pork supply is sufficient, and the price is steady. In March, services price increased by 1.1%, down for 0.1 percentage points compared with last month. Overall, steady price and mild growth is well-founded. Thank you. The last question. Thank you. Over the years, due to international circumstances, there is pressure on the supply. Can the supply meet domestic demand? Thank you.
Indeed, there's a big change in international situation this year, which has an impact on agricultural supply and production. But if you look at our domestic market, agricultural output and supply has been stable. First of all, government attaches great importance to agriculture and has adopted a lot of policies to support the development of agriculture, to give better play to science and technology and cultural development, and has produced good results. China's grain output for 7 years has maintained above 1.3 trillion jin. And our output in the first quarter has been stable as well. Output grew by 6%. In terms of crop plantation, the value added grew by 4.8%. Affected by the flood in autumn, the plantation of wheat in winter had been postponed, and this year the weather conditions for winter wheat has been very good and favorable. And in northwestern region, the plantation and demand has basically matched each other. And that's why there is steady and sufficient supply. Meat and poultry grew by 8.8% in the first quarter, and in the next step, I think food supply will be stable. Because, firstly, different levels of government has been working rigorously to implement decisions of the State Council to ensure food security, and they will ensure the area of arable land and plantation areas. And secondly, the price for the purchase of rice and wheat has been going up, which will ensure good supply and will mobilize the farmers to increase production. Thirdly, the grain prices have seen a steady growth, and that's why people are more willing to plant the crops. But at the same time, costs has been climbing as well, and we still need to work to tackle the challenge of insects and weather conditions. In the first quarter, major industrial products such as electricity and thermal power has been growing. Coal production, coal producers has been implementing the policy to ensure stable supply, increase the quality of coal. Large-scale coal producers has produced 108 million tons, which is an increase of 10.3%. Large-scale crude oil producers produced 4.4% more year on year. Electricity supply grew by 3.1%, and clean energy grew by 8.3%, which drove a 2.1% growth in all electricity supply. In the international market, energy prices has been volatile, and we are facing some pressure in energy supply, but we have the capability to ensure stable and reliable supply of energy. In the future, we will continue to implement the policies to ensure stable prices and supply of energy, and continue to ensure sound supply of traditional energy like coal, oil, and gas, to ensure the steady development of agriculture and the economy as a whole. Thank you. That's the end of the press conference today. Thank you for coming.